We're all good? Yep. Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's special council meeting for purposes of a strategy session related to infrastructure. I guess, Mr. Taggi, are you starting things off, or?
Yes,
okay.
whenever you're ready.
Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, first I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity this afternoon to give you a snapshot.
Can you move your mic up a little bit? Some people are having a hard time hearing you. Thank you.
I want to thank you for the opportunity you have given us to speak to you this afternoon and provide you with a snapshot of the state of some of our infrastructure in the city. Before I begin, let me introduce the team you have in front of you. I think most of you know Wally Malcolm, Director of Utilities, and Hans Gross, our city engineer. You may or may not know Jason Winter. Jason is one of the managers in our asset management division. In addition to the three staff members we have supporting in this presentation, I also want to thank a number of other staff who worked very hard behind the scenes, both in INS but also in finance and other departments, who provided lots of information that you're going to see later on today. In terms of our agenda, I will start with providing you with a brief overview of our assets. What assets do we own, manage, and operate. Also point out to you some of the challenges we have with those assets. Following that part of the presentation, Wally will talk to you in more details about the water utility. He will also speak to you briefly about the Clean Water Act as well as the Safe Drinking Water Act, and also talk to you about some of your responsibilities, both as council, but also individually as the board of directors of the water utility. Hans will then follow up with a brief description of the accelerated infrastructure replacement program. He will also talk about some of the challenges with respect to sanitary sewers and storm sewers. And the last part of the presentation, then I will come back and I will provide you with some concluding thoughts and also some mitigation strategies, and you may call them some of the bold steps that we need to take on the move forward basis. So let me just start with the assets we own. And do we have pointer? So if you look at water utility, we have about 893, almost 900 kilometers of water mains. And I think that number is important because I will talk about that number a little later on. The replacement value of about $770 million. The gas utility represents about 1,000 kilometers of gas pipes with a replacement value of $244 million. The sanitary utility, again, about 816 kilometers of sewer pipes and $910 million in replacement value. Storm utility, about 600 kilometers of storm pipes, about 125 storm water management ponds, and 80 kilometers of streams with a replacement value of $705 million. The transportation services represents over 20,000 street lights, 21,000 traffic signs, 19 surface parking lots, 5 garage structures with a replacement value of over $108 million. Forestry, over 60,000 street trees with a replacement value of $30 million. Parks and open areas, 245 kilometers of trails, 136 playgrounds, and 170 sports fields with a replacement value of $56 million. Roads and traffic, we have 851 kilometers of roads, 1,100 kilometers of sidewalk, and number of bridges with a replacement value of over $1.15 billion. Facilities, we own approximately 250 city-owned facilities and buildings with an area of 3.5 million square feet and a replacement value of $431 million. And lastly, we have a large fleet of over 1,400 vehicles. We spend over 1.7 million liters of fuel, and replacement value of the fleet is $62 million. So if you add all that up, you can see that we own substantial amount of assets, totaling over $4.5 billion. Now, I will go through some of the slides quickly as to some of the experience from other municipalities. The reason we are showing other municipalities to tell you that we certainly are not unique in terms of the state of our infrastructure. A lot of other municipalities have a similar situation to ours. Yet the point has to be made that a number of municipalities have taken corrective action. And in fact, some of them started over 10 years ago because of the experience they saw from other municipalities. These are some of the things that we really do not want to see happen in our city. So we want to prevent these things from happening, and that's why we are in front of you this afternoon. So the risk, as you see in these slides, and again, they are not from Kitchener, they are from other cities, but there's a real risk that if we do nothing, then something like this will happen. It's not could happen, it will happen. It's only a matter of time. So I'm going to play a bit of a video clip. I think this is from Philadelphia. And again, I think the point in showing this clip is that we need to act before something like this happens.
Yeah, let me get a little bit more of the top of Westminster.
Oh, okay. So then you want to we should go up there?
Yeah, if you want to talk to someone.
Now, a bit closer to home, this is on Franklin Street in Kitchener. Not as dramatic as you saw the other clip in Philadelphia, but nonetheless very concerning in terms of what could happen and what actually did happen in our own city. I'm sorry, I don't have a control to move forward a bit. I think the next.
Bitterly cold morning, a water main break and a frozen mess for residents in the Bridgeport area. A large pipe, one of the biggest in Kitchener, burst this morning, swamping cars and flooded basements. The main belongs to city, but it's the property owners who may get stuck with the tap. CTV's Max joins us now at the intersection of Bridgeport Road and Lancaster Street. Max, that area remained closed to traffic now more than 12 hours after break.
You're exactly right, Megan. Crews continue to work on the water main behind me, and it is one of the bigger ones in the city of Kitchener. And you know, a bigger water main means more water rushing through it when it breaks.
Imagine your basement belongings floating up around your knees. That's what Brent Nimsel woke up to on one of the coldest mornings this winter.
All this water is damaged just about everything's loaded it, and it's frozen now.
So are his water heater and furnace. Thousands of dollars in water now turned to ice damage.
I don't care who pays for it. It's not going to be me.
A break in one of Kitchener's bigger water mains turned the neighborhood into a big skating rink.
Now I can't get into the truck. There's it's like 2 inches frozen to the back wheel, so won't be leaving this morning.
After turning down the water flow, crews were digging in to find the break. And digging in to whose insurance will pay for repairs.
So I've handed out some claim forms. So basically what happens is they fill out the claim, all the invoices, and they send it downtown.
Kitchener Utilities says record-breaking low temperatures overnight caused the water main break. For insurance purposes, that means it could be considered an act of God, meaning the city would not be responsible.
Meaning anyone filing a claim against the city's insurer won't be successful.
I don't know what the success rates are, but they usually contact us and we would give them the detail of what happened.
Himsel will have to go through his own insurance, so he can expect higher premiums at renewal time.
This flood damage here is the worst.
Now, crews expect to have the water main repaired by tomorrow morning. Now, as you may or may not know, overland flood insurance isn't covered in Canada, so you may want to call your insurance agent to find out what your policy covers when it comes to water damage. Megan.
All right, good idea. Thanks, Matt.
So to sum up this part of the presentation, Mr. Mayor and Council, I think it's a good news and bad news story. Good news is that city does have a very good asset management program in place which provides fairly reliable data and based upon which we can make sound decisions. The program provides information with respect to all aspects of asset planning, design, construction, maintenance, and operations. Now, some of the areas the program is just starting to look into. Others are fairly well developed, but I think we are on the right path in terms of the information and the data we have. And asset management represents really a core business in terms of the tool that we need to get information and make sound decisions. When one reviews the data, one thing becomes quite clear that our infrastructure is deteriorating at a very fast rate, and it's resulting in risks and failures at a greater rate than before. An example would be that since 1997, we have spent over $25 million just on water main repairs. Now, if you look at that number, I think the thing is we are spending that money, and yet there's not much improvement in the system except you're patching the system. In the past 12 months, there were more water main breaks than any other 12-month period in the history of since we started keeping records. Since November 2014, we had 136 water main breaks, and that represents over $2 million in terms of repair cost. The challenge we face, there are three factors for those. Number one, the chronic historical deficit in funding. Number two, skyrocketing replacement costs. And number three, increasing age of the assets. And I will talk about those three factors a little later on in my part of the presentation. Now, in 2003 and 2004, city started in the right direction when the decision was made to start with the accelerated infrastructure replacement program in 2003 and 2004. And the fund for the first year, I believe, were something like $15 million. I think, as I said, it was the right program in the right direction. However, few things went unexpected in the direction that we didn't expect. And first was the construction costs have been skyrocketing, and those costs really have had no relationships with the consumer price index or rate of inflation. And again, I want to talk about that point later as well. And what that has done is it has increased the gap between the expectations that were laid out when the program was started as compared to the actual reality that we see today. Little later, Hans will talk more about this particular program. In essence, some of our infrastructure is actually way past the expiry date on borrowed time, which means we cannot predict when that part of infrastructure may fail. One of the conclusions you're going to see later on would be that we need significant additional resources, both in terms of financial resources, but also in terms of human resources to manage the program. We need money for not only replacement program, but also, because with aging infrastructure, it will require more maintenance and operations money. And lastly, what is happening is, and really it's a triple whammy, because more money and time you spend on corrective action, things like repairing water main break or sewer that breaks down, you are sucking resources from doing the normal corrective maintenance and making sure that you maintain the infrastructure in proper shape. The sanitary and stormwater system is in a similar situation as water mains. So I'm going to stop my comments at this particular point in time, and I'll turn over to Wally, who will provide you information a bit more about the water utility. Wally?
Good afternoon. We must refocus our attention to water, our most valuable natural resource, an essential part of our everyday lives. I'd like to bring you back 15 years ago, May 2000, where a tragedy occurred in Walkerton. In May 2000, 7 people died and thousands were sickened due to the state of the infrastructure. There was an inquiry, the Walkerton inquiry, headed up by Justice O'Connor. The first part of that inquiry dealt with what happened in Walkerton. If you recall, in the 1990s, the government at the time was under a common sense revolution. The Minister of Energy at the time stated that the Ministry of Energy was an overregulated sector which suffered from mission drift and focus drift. As a result of the common sense revolution, the Ministry of Environment underwent significant budget cuts between 1994 and 2000. The Ministry of Environment seen their operating budget cut by 42%. The ministry also reduced its staff by 750 people, which is approximately 30% of their staff. During the inquiry on June 29, 2001, Premier Mike Harris told the inquiry that he was never warned that budget cuts could lead to serious health risks. I tell you, common sense tells you if you cut your budget and don't maintain your system, eventually it will fail. The second part of the inquiry started to deal with Walkerton happened. Now what do we do in Ontario to ensure that we have the steps in place needed to prevent a similar tragedy as in what happened in Walkerton? The recommendations, there were 93. All of the recommendations have been accepted by succeeding governments in the province of During the inquiry, Justice O'Connor recommended that Ontario residents be guaranteed by law that their tap water is safe. Additionally, Justice O'Connor recommended the government spend $280 million to make the water safe, with an added $49 million annually for maintenance of the water distribution system. If you look up on the screen, there is a number of water main breaks that have occurred. Fairway Road at Manitou, Cortlandt Avenue. In southern Ontario, we've been fortunate over the past 10 years to have mild winters. And as we know, in cyclical seasons and time periods over years, you get warm spells and you get cold spells. In 2014, winter reappeared. The cycle is back, that we're into colder winters. Not only did we have a frigid winter in 2014, but in February of 2015 of this year, we've seen very cold temperatures again, driving frost into the ground 7 feet, impacting the majority of our water mains. On April 23, 2015, we had 9 water main breaks in one day. The total cost, over $100,000 just for the repairs. That does not include repairing the roads. There was 1 boil water advisory. Our water mains, our water pipes, are in close proximity to our sanitary pipes. If these pipes break and join together, you have sanitary within the water distribution system. When that occurs, that's when you have a boil water advisory come in place so that it protects the residents. So we don't have a similar situation that occurred in Walkerton in May 2000. This is the new normal for the past couple years. And as weather cycles go, we predict that we're going to be seeing similar colder weather in the near future. And with the cold weather, the water main breaks that we've encountered over the past 2 years will be a reality for the next few years. Next slide. In front of you see the growth of the water main installation within the City of Kitchener. This growth follows the growth of the City of Kitchener. Prior to World War II, there was only 36,000 inhabitants in the City of Kitchener. After World War II, the city grew exponentially. On a 5-year basis, every 5 years, the City of Kitchener grew 35.6%, 22.3%, 26.8% throughout the 60s. Huge growth. We went from 36,000 people in the City of Kitchener to, by the time we got into the 90s, we were 131,000 residents in the City of Kitchener. With the boom of the manufacturing time period after World War II, led to people moving to the City of Kitchener. And when you have houses being built to accommodate the people who are working in our manufacturing industry, they need services. The services they need, one of them is water. So on the graph, you could see the growth following World War II, and you can also see the age of our infrastructure during that time period. What's on the screen is the history of water main breaks. This information is based on the data from 1997 to 2014. The total cost on the thermometer is the cost that it takes to be reactive in fixing these water main breaks over this time period. The water utility requires funds in order to repair these water main breaks. And these are funds that are being diverted from our maintenance programs in order to repair the damaged water main breaks. One street that I've seen many water main breaks is Brick Street. From 1994, the number of water main breaks has drastically increased. Work is underway in 2015 to reconstruct this deficiency. Picture yourself on Brick Street and every year seeing a water main break year after year. The people have been frustrated, people want answers, and they want their service. Part of the recommendations of the Safe Drinking Water Act was a standard of care. The standard of care, as it relates to the operation and management of a municipal drinking water system, is to exercise the level of care, diligence, and skill that a reasonably prudent person would expect it to exercise in a similar situation, where the people act honestly, competently, and with integrity with the view of ensuring the protection and safety of the users of the drinking water system. The persons subject to this statutory standard of care include the owner of municipal drinking water systems. As a municipal council, you are the owner of the drinking water system within the City of Kitchener. You are subject to the statutory standard of care. The person who oversees the accredited operating authority, as top management, I have been delegated that authority. I have a responsibility to advise you as council, as the owner of this system, the state of our infrastructure. Among other things within the Safe Drinking Water Act is there may be orders that contain directions that require repairing or maintaining the drinking water system. It's one thing to install the pipes, do the testing on the water, but you also have to repair and maintain that drinking water system. The graph that's in front of you shows the cost components regarded in a water utility. The water mains, the current funding level averages about $6.2 million annually for replacement only. There will be a deficit by 2023, which will see $63 million. In regards to our water meters, which measure the flow of volumes, which in turn determines what our revenues will be, the current funding level of $0.41 million per year is significantly below the requirements to adhere to prescribed replacement cycles. The current deficit in water meter replacements is $1.8 million. On the graph itself, you can see the reserve level. Back in 2009, there was 0. If you look at a balanced scorecard with a red, yellow, and green light, this would signal a red light in our system. In 2010 and 2011, our reserves started to build up, and the surplus was much needed. So then we turned from a red light into a yellow light, heading towards, in a trending world, to a green light for sustainability in our water distribution system. However, there was a turn, and then revenues in 2013 and 2014 did not meet our expenditure requirements for a water utility. We are now below that 0 mark, which again puts us in a red light area in regards to our distribution system for the water utility. Revenue is the lifeblood of a water utility. Without adequate revenues, the quality of service will deteriorate from the lack of proper maintenance and system improvements. If you look at the water rate disparity, in 2011, the city's portion was less than what was required to ensure what we were passing from the region of Waterloo, who supplies the water to the City of Kitchener. This continued on until we went to 2015, where we had a major deficit within the water utility. Council made a bold decision in regards to increasing the rates in order to get us out of that deficit position. However, the weather dictates a different story. Cold weather in the winter of 2015 created water main breaks, which chewed up the money that we received from that rate increase. In order to ensure a proper water distribution system, you have to maintain that system. In order to maintain the system, you have to have maintenance programs. In order to do maintenance programs, you need funding in order to do those maintenance programs. A critical component of our water distribution system is valves and valve maintenance. You cannot expect the valves to sit in the ground year after year and not be maintained. When you need it in an emergency, when you need it to maintain your system, when you need it to flush the water mains, and they break, it causes grief and havoc. During a water main break, if we cannot turn those valves, the water continues to flow. You've seen videos of what occurred on Franklin Street. You've seen what occurred out in Bridgeport area. That's a reality. Water will flow if we cannot turn it off in a good time period. One way of helping with our water quality and helping with the pipes that are in the ground is our water main cleaning. And we do that by flushing through the hydrants. With metal and concrete, which the majority of our water pipes are, they corrode internally. With a chemical reaction in the water, you get scale forming on the walls of these pipes. Scale can clog fixtures and reduce the flow of water in those pipes. A flushing maintenance program removes the corrosion and scale from the walls of the pipe by utilizing high water pressure from the hydrants. Valving is a critical component of that hydrant flushing, and we need to ensure the maintenance of that program. I'll now pass it on to Mr. Gross, who will talk about the sanitary.
Thanks, Wally. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. While the sanitary sewers aren't quite as dramatic when they fail as water mains, they do cause other problems. They cause sewage backups, basement flooding, to name just one or two of the issues. What you see in front of you are examples of some of the older pipes that are in the process of being replaced. Palmer Avenue, for instance, you'll see root intrusion. Kennedy Avenue, you've got some lateral cracks in the old clay pipe. And on Strange Street, there's total loss of structural integrity. And again, that's an old clay tile pipe. Some of the activities that our sanitary utility undertake to try and keep the pipes flowing, there's the trenchless rehabilitation program. That's where we reline pipes to try to keep them going for a few more years. There's a spot repair program where we dig down and fix spots. There's a flow monitoring program where we measure flows to see whether or not the pipes are surcharging or whether they can take additional capacity. There's a closed circuit TV program that we undertake to determine the structural integrity and whether or not there need to be repairs done. There's flushing, emergency repair work. There's cleaning of service connections if they block up. We also do hydraulic modeling. This is all part of the sanitary utility that's done. There's condition assessment, condition scoring, system analysis, and there's also a system for the remote control of and data acquisition from sewage pumping stations called SCADA. So those are all activities that are undertaken by the sanitary utility in order to keep the program fully running. On the next slide, you'll see a slide that's very similar to the water utility. The one thing I would point out is the timeline between 1950 and 1980. And I think on the closer monitors you'll be able to see those dates. In those dates, approximately 35 to 40% of the current infrastructure that we have was constructed. And 1950, the 80-year life expectancy comes due around 2030. So 1950 to 1980 installation corresponds to 2030 to 2060 approximate replacement date. Now, the 2030 date is something that I would like you to keep in mind because it really follows through from our accelerated infrastructure replacement program. So 2030 is a key date where you see a huge amount of activity that's going to have to start. Next slide, please. Similar to water, as you can see, there was a decrease in revenue, a decrease in rates, starting in 2011, carrying on to 2014, and in 2015 there came a good hike, which essentially allowed us to continue with the programs, but resulted in no net reserve in the utility. Under the stormwater system, there are more frequent, more high-intensity storms. I think you've seen that, and by all measures, they will continue. Some of the pictures show the Hidden Valley washout as a result of a very intense storm. There's a Laurel Creek bank failure. There's the Fairview Mall flooding that has taken place in the past, I believe, several times. On the next page, there's the creek rehabilitation program that's needed for parts of Schneider Creek. And in the bottom picture, that's near Greenbrook Drive, Forest Hill Drive, and the one on the right is Sterling Avenue at the Expressway. One thing to be aware of is that in the areas of the downtown and developments that occurred pre the 70s, and I'm sure Councillor Janicki will probably remember this, that they did not incorporate any overland flow routes for stormwater systems. That started in the early 70s when there was a path for water that was dedicated, whether it was on road rights-of-way, through easements, through pathways, to be able to get off the street and into streams without causing problems. Prior to that time, that was not the case. That's why we see areas of flooding that occur at the present time. One of the things that the stormwater utility is doing as part of its master plan, which will be updated, which will be given an update to you later this year, is the planning of overland flow routes for stormwater systems. That's to come. That will involve a fair bit of thought as well as finances. In terms of what the storm utility does, they have the water course improvement program. They have a stormwater management pond retrofit. The stormwater management ponds are an interesting beast. They're a good, I would say, infrastructure asset, but they do take a fair bit of maintenance. Approximately every 10 years, they need to be cleaned out and updated to current standards. The average cost of that is about $1 million each. And, you know, if they're full of sediment, they don't work. Those are ongoing maintenance costs that are going to have to be addressed. There's a drainage improvement program that we have to try to help residents with drainage. There's the water course maintenance and repair, street sweeping. Leaf pickup is funded from this utility, and of course any spills that occur. Those are just some of the things that the program undertakes. And if we go to the next slide, which is the current state of stormwater, and again, I point out the span between 1950 and 1980, which results in replacement from between 2030 and 2060. You'll see that spike in activity when we had large development. In some of the older sections of the city, up to about 1960s, early 60s, there were either no storm sewers on streets or partial storm sewers, or the storm sewers were only designed to what we call a 2-year return storm, so that it would have the capacity to carry water that the storm occurred every 2 years. That's been upgraded, and that currently is a 5-year return storm. These are details, but the point is that the pipes are, are too small for the more frequent storms that are now occurring. And we are in the process of reviewing whether or not that needs to be changed. The university is working toward new statistics, and those are things that we'll be taking a look at. And that was the end of the storm. Now, I'm prepared to carry on unless anyone wishes to have a break, and I'm getting the word to carry on. The AIRP funding. AIRP is the Accelerated Infrastructure Replacement Program. That program was developed in 2002, and the funding model was based on historical trends and age, primarily age criteria of infrastructure replacement, and the program was intended to last for 30 years. Now, it was set up to replace about 260 kilometers in total, which is about a third of the city and results in about 8.6 kilometers per year. It ends in 2032. And remember the date that I mentioned where we have that huge start in infrastructure assets, 2030 to 2060. Well, this program ends in 2032, so that's still something to keep in mind when you see following graphs. This program, by the way, also replaces the road when it's needed to be replaced, and that is the road infrastructure, the sidewalks, the curbs, the boulevards, the driveway ramps. So all of that is tied into the AIRP. And the funding for that is a triple funding. As you can see on the bottom of the slide, 46% comes from the sanitary utility, 31% from water, and 23% for storm water. So those utilities at the moment pay for the replacement of the surface road infrastructure. And an 80 to 90 year cycle is about the right time frame for a road structure to be fully replaced. It goes in 30-year increments. We are currently, second bullet, we do know, and I think you've heard this before, that the cost of replacement has gone up significantly. There's an increased gap between what we can do and what we should be doing. And we continuously gather information on the systems to be able to prioritize what streets need to be done when. We continuously get better information for sanitary, water, storm, so that we're doing the right assets, replacing the right assets at the right time and on a priority basis. The next set of graphs are intended to build on one another. The first graph shows a green line, and it starts at 2003, 2004 with a $16 million accelerated infrastructure replacement cap. That green line represents the funding cap that you see in the capital forecast, the capital program. There's an accelerated infrastructure replacement program. That program has a cap. Each year it was given a cap, and we fit the replacement of roads within that cap. We try not to exceed it. So the green line that you see there from the start of the program to 2015 represents the cap that was provided for that program. So we fit all of the replacements within that cap. From 2015 onward, for the 10-year period, the green line represents the 10-year capital forecast, the cap for the 10-year capital forecast. Essentially, it's about a 4% increase per year. And that has been extended out to the end of the program to 2032. So remember that the end of the program is 2032. The big spike in assets goes from 2030 to 2060. Next slide. The red line is the cost between the start of the program and now, current day, the cost of actually replacing 8.66 kilometers of road per year. At the present time, we should be spending $44 million a year. That should be the cap. So the difference between the red line and the green line is what we haven't done. And what we haven't done is approximately half of what we should have done. So we've got a deficit of about $252 million. So if we go on to the next slide, the next slide shows what would be the spending required on the basis that construction costs will increase at 2% per year. It's an estimate only. It's a best guess. If you extend the line backwards to the start of the program, 2% seems to be an average as well. So it's an average that we've used for this particular exercise. What it will be, I'm not sure, but it's a starting point. The next slide shows the dark blue from 2015 to the end of the program, and that's the amount of money that we would have to spend in order to complete the entire program. Or sorry, that is the deficit that exists over top of the 2% increase in order to do the work that hasn't been done. If we go to the next slide, you'll see a dashed green line. And the dashed green line represents, for the first 10-year period from 2015 to 2025, an average 9% increase on the cap, on the AIRP cap, spending cap. And then it levels off at 4% carrying on. As you can see, with that scenario, we reach the projected replacement rate at around 2029, but we really haven't addressed any of the deficit or any of the work that we haven't done because we are not at the rate that we should be replacing infrastructure with. When do we meet the top line? Perhaps just extrapolating, we meet the top line in about 2045, but even at that point, we're only meeting a projected rate. We haven't really done all of the work that's deficient. We haven't done work that we should have been doing before. And if we go to the last slide is a pink line. That's an average of 13% per year increase on the cap from now until the end of the program in 2032. And that's what's needed in order to complete all the work envisioned within the program. And remember, that's based on a 2% construction rate increase from now to the end. So these numbers are one is based on the other for the purpose of this exercise. Ideally, if you could, if we started at 2015, we would increase our spending to the top blue line at $60 million a year, run along that blue line, until the end of the program, and then we would probably be in a situation to be able to tackle the next set of infrastructure that needs replacing. Now, that's a theory. Obviously, that's difficult to do, both from a construction point of view and from a resource point of view. But that's one way to look at it. And if we went straight up in 2015 to the blue line and took the blue line and did that spending, that would give us the deficits that we have not completed. At that point, I'm going to turn it back to Mr. Tyagi to complete the presentation.
Thanks, Hans. I realize you had a lot of information presented to you, a lot of graphs, a lot of numbers, and I'll try to sum them up the best I can and simplify them the best I can. But let me start off with talking about why are we in this situation. As I mentioned earlier, the reason we are so far behind, there are three main factors. One is the chronic deficit in the funding. The second is skyrocketing replacement costs. And the third one, aging infrastructure. Now, we really can't do much about number two and number three. So the only thing under our control is number one, which is the funding for replacement and maintenance and operation of the infrastructure. So could we go back to slide 21, please? I think this is an important slide to tell the story. And the story is, if you look at this slide and look at what has happened in terms of the water rate changes from 2006 to 2000. Let's talk about 2014 first. So from 2006 to 2014, at the bottom of the graph, you will see the percentage increase in the water rates by the wholesaler, if you may. So if you just look at the graph and say, you are the retailer and you're buying a commodity from a wholesaler. So the wholesaler is increasing the price by 2.6% in 2006. What do? We increase our part by 0.9%. 2007, the wholesaler increased the price by 5.32%. Again, what do? 1.18%. 2008, 5.42, we are 4.48. 2009, 5.34, we are 4.56. 2010, 3.69, we are at 3.21. And then it really gets nasty. 2011, the wholesale price goes up by 3.67%. Our price goes down by 0.77%. 2012, 3.86%, we go down by 0.36%. 2013, 4.02%, and we are only at 0.73% on our part of the cost. 2014, the wholesale price goes up 2.96%, we are only at 0.54%. So if you sum up all the increases between 2006 and 2014, the wholesale price, if you may, went up by 43.5%. Our part went up only by about 15%. Now, what I'm going to state, Mr. Mayor and members of council, It may sound like a criticism of the past decisions. It may not even sound very pleasant to hear, frankly. But I really believe that it's my job to give you the unvarnished truth. And also, I think it's my job to provide you with the best possible policy advice that I can. Frankly, looking at this graph, it's no accident that we find ourselves in the situation that we are in terms of the state of our infrastructure. I think it was a perfect strategy if the goal was to drive the water utility business into the ground. No pun intended. Last year, we did make a correction when we and this council agreed to a rate increase that on our part was 7.07%. So as we stand from 2006 to 2015, the wholesale price went up 47.5% from 2006 to 2015. Our price went up about half of that, 23.4%. And the result is, if you recall, I mentioned earlier when you're looking at earlier slides that we have about 900 kilometers of water mains in the city. So by simple math, if we replace about 9 kilometers a year, that will give us a replacement cycle of 100 years. If we want 80 years of replacement cycle, that we need to replace 11 kilometers of water main every year. And that will give us about 81 years replacement cycle. And I think that's where we need to be. Currently, we are replacing water mains at a rate of approximately 5 kilometers a year. And that is a replacement cycle of 179 years. No water main pipe can last that long. So the message, I guess, is where we are is not sustainable. And we need to continue on the path that we started in 2015 in terms of making baseline corrections to how we have been dealing with providing funding for replacement and maintenance of our infrastructure. Slide 37, please. So moving forward, we need to look at a long-term strategy. And as Hans showed you in earlier slide, there was a pink line, which was a 13% annual increase for next 10 years in AIRP. And that's the investment increase that we are recommending as a staff. That would mean an increase in utility rates ranging from 5.6% to 8.8%. Other thing I want to point out on this table is on the right column, the rightmost column, that column shows how our asset has been increasing. And you can see that in 10 years from 2004 to 2014, our assets have increased from 16% for water mains to 22% for storm sewers and 20% for the sanitary sewers. And what that means is when we increase our infrastructure, we need to provide matching money to maintain them. So in addition to that 8.8% and 5.6% and 7.2% increase in utility rates for replacement, we are also recommending that we provide about 2% increase in the rates to provide for maintenance and operations of the infrastructure. And the reason for that recommendation is that since we know, as Hans said, if we start at a very high number, I think it was 60-some million, then we can follow the blue line. Since we can't do that, that means we will have increased need for repairing and maintaining the assets that we do have. I think one way to look at this would be if somebody were replacing a car that they own every 3 years or 5 years, there will be very little need for maintenance, except for normal operating costs, obviously. But if you have a 25-year-old car, then you do need a lot more money to keep it roadworthy. And that's what we're talking about, that we need to infuse money. As Wally said in his presentation, what is currently happening is, because of all the water main breaks, the resources, both money and staff resources, are diverted to taking care of the corrective maintenance, which is going out, taking care of the emergencies and fixing the water mains, means the preventive maintenance part is really suffering, and we need to add to that. So the bottom line would be the rate increase for sanitary sewers of 10.8%, storm 9.2%, and water 7.6%. Next slide, please. So what does this all mean in terms of the households? It means that an average household will see a rate increase of $1.13 per month on their sanitary bill, 93 cents on water, and 44 cents per month on their storm water bill. I must say, it may sound aggressive, but even at 13%, as the graph you saw earlier, is not aggressive enough. I think this is what we are saying. I think we need to start at and look at this again in about 5 years' time. Next slide, please. So some of my concluding thoughts. Again, to reiterate, we have a huge deficit in each of the three utilities, both in terms of the money required for replacement, but also money required for maintenance and operations. Now, if there's one point I want to leave with Council, it will be the next one. And the point is that when we talk about infrastructure and the rate at which the infrastructure deteriorates, it has absolutely nothing to do with the rate of inflation. It has nothing to do with consumer price index. Those numbers may be important for many instances, but when dealing with infrastructure, those numbers are absolutely meaningless. The infrastructure does not follow the man-made numbers like CPI index. Infrastructure follows the complex laws of engineering, physics, and chemistry, and the deterioration of the infrastructure, as I said earlier, had nothing to do with rate of inflation or CPI index. The second point I want to make is also that the construction costs have not been following the rate of inflation either. And the reason for that is that the basket of goods that determines the rate of inflation, again, has absolutely nothing to do with the materials required for constructing and replacing infrastructure. Again, I'm repeating myself, but we do need a fairly significant infusion of more money, both for replacement and maintenance and operations. And the three utilities, as we indicated earlier, we are recommending sanitary rates go up by 10.8%, water by 7.6%, and stormwater by 9.2%. Now, by the way, these rate increases include the expected or projected rate increases that we are expecting from the region. Also, we need to focus on better inspection and quality control during construction. because I believe an ounce of prevention will go a long way in terms of making certain that when we're installing the infrastructure, proper due care is being taken, and those structures will last a long time. Thank you very much, and we'll be happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for this presentation. There's no doubt that this was a lengthy presentation, that there was significant information in it, and it also paints a picture that I think is one that this council, and in fact councils across Canada, have been speaking about for some time, and that's about the need for support from the additional support from the other orders of government when it comes to infrastructure, if it's not going to be left in the hands of taxpayers or ratepayers to deal with all of these issues. But maybe I'll say more on that later. There's a number of people with questions. I have some of my own. And I'll go first. Councillor Ioannidis, you're first on the list.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Urbanovic.
Yeah.
Is it possible for me to ask my one question related to all questions?
To all questions? Well, okay. What's your question? Yeah. Go ahead, Councillor Fernandez.
I just want to ask that we rescind our regular rules and regulation, because I believe I have 20 questions right now. Some of them may be covered by other councillors in the meantime, but I think we need to be very generous. This is a very, very important issue, and allow 10 minutes for each councillor to ask their questions so that we can get through them in a fairly timely manner.
Councillor Fernandez, I guess there's, at this point at least, there's at least 4 people in the queue to ask questions, and I think everybody should have that opportunity. They shouldn't necessarily, have their questions not be able to get asked simply because somebody else is taking 10 minutes. So I'll be following our normal rules of procedure on this. You're second in the queue, just so that you're aware, though. So, Councillor Ioannidis, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. That's a lot of news there. I guess my question is, the way I kind of look at it is, I don't think we can do this on our own. I think this is something that we need to have other levels of government to provide our support. So, in the past, and this may be related to Mr. Chapman, and if he can answer that, if we go along with the increases and all that stuff, and because we're trying to be good stewards for our community, and whereas other communities who choose to not provide the funding or neglect or whatever it may be, and then in the future the feds decide to do provide some kind of form of funding, how does that relate to us? Because it seems to me we're going to be taking our infrastructure on of our taxpayers back, but then the government will come in and save the day for other municipalities. So would we be compensated for that kind of commitment, or are we just going to be, whatever is the deficit is, this is what it is?
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, if I understand the question correctly, I've never been aware of, nor could I conceive of, a program where a higher order of government would reimburse a municipality for investments it's made previously.
Okay. I guess...
hold on, Dad, did you want to add to that?
Yes, very briefly, Mr. Mayor, I think 2 things to keep in mind. Given the history as to what has happened at federal, provincial levels, I think chances of either level of government coming up with a huge program which will be sustainable are very remote. And the second comment I will make would be that number of municipalities, in fact, have taken steps. I know, for example, in one of the large municipalities, about 15 years ago, they started to increase their water rates by 9% every year for 10 years. And after 10 years, the expectation was that the rates will then come down to the normal levels. And last year, they went back to the drawing board and they said, no, they can't come back to the normal level for the next 5 years. They again agreed to increase water rates by 5 or 6% a year. So I don't think the bold action we are recommending, I don't think it's in isolation. I think a number of other municipalities are taking responsible steps to make sure that they have safe, clean, reliable source of water supply.
Okay, you can keep yourself on. My next question does relate to you because you do have some experience in working with other municipalities in particular, and if you just are they in a similar situation as us, or are they in better shape than us, or are we in better shape than them? Because I think your experience would give me a little better clarity on where I think we need to go.
I can tell you, and very safely, based on my experience, the number of water main breaks we are having is not in proportion to the size and the population of our city.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Fernandez.
Thanks. So I'm probably going to go over my 5 minutes. So I'm going to try and ask some questions that can have very quick and succinct answers. My first question is related to the graph on page 3. And when I did a quick calculation, just including water, sanitary, and storm, I had 2.385 billion. Then I took a look at the graph that was on page 16, which is the water mains that were over 50 years old. That was 25% of that. So when you have a $4.5 billion title on here, you're talking about every single asset that we own within the city. That's not just the water, sanitary, and storm, right? Okay. I mean, I just want to make sure that the public who is viewing and when the media puts this out, that we really have the numbers that are actually about our infrastructure, which the rest of this presentation was regarding, which is our water, our sanitary, and our storm. The gas utility of $244 million is not included in terms of the concerns for infrastructure. Is that correct?
You are correct. I think the focus today is really on the three utilities: stormwater, sanitary, and water mains.
Okay. So if I look at that number, and if my math is incorrect, I'm sure somebody will correct me. 25% of that, based on page 16, is $500 million, which is infrastructure that is over 50 years old. So that's really the portion of infrastructure that we are most concerned about at this point right now. Is that correct?
We are most concerned about some of the older infrastructure, but I think Wally probably can provide more.
Actually, I saw Mr. Gross nodding his head, so I'm expecting that is probably okay. So really the number that we have to be concerned about is the $500 million of infrastructure that's 50 years old plus. One of the other questions I wanted to ask you is a clarification regarding the comments about Walkerton. My understanding from following the media and having people who lived in Walkerton at the time that it was not an infrastructure problem per se, as it was the deception and lack of clear and evidence about what the two gentlemen in Walkerton did with regard to the water, the data, the collection, the results, and all their deception around. That really was the breaking point for Walkerton. Isn't that correct?
I will give you my understanding, and then Wally can add more if you need more information. My understanding is you are correct that the action of the two people in charge of running the utility triggered the inquiry. But the inquiry did not limit itself to what triggered the inquiry. It went beyond, and it found many problems in the system across the province.
And I agree with you, Mr. Tiagi, but I think I just wanted to make sure that we were very clear on what was the impetus to the Walkerton situation, and the inquiry, of course, would go much further. So just going back to my question, you and I have had a very good and informative meeting a week and a half ago, and one of the things that we talked about was the workmanship and the lack of inspection and the problems with asphalt, because I said, roads are crumbling so much faster. And you agreed with me at that time that it is some of these problems are related to that directly, not just to the age of the infrastructure. Would that capture what we were discussing? Part of what we were discussing?
I think you're right, Councillor. I think the age is only one factor. I think how the pipe was built, constructed, how it was installed, has a factor also in terms of how long they're going to last in the ground.
Okay. When we're talking about, and Councillor Ioannidis asked a question regarding the fact that what other municipalities are struggling with this. I mean, this is very good information, very important for us to prepare ourselves and prepare the public for what is going to be inevitable in terms of our aging infrastructure. It says, I think Mr. Malcolm said that we were not unique, or yourself said we were not unique. How many other municipalities are you aware of, and maybe that's a difficult question for you to answer, that are struggling with the same kind of problems that we are right now?
I'll answer that question in two parts. First is not only municipalities. I think all the levels of government have been struggling with aging infrastructure, so that's common across the country. The difference is the second part of my answer, which is each municipality is handling their challenges in different ways. Some are much further ahead than others are. So, I just said, from our presentation, the way I see the picture, I think we need to change the pace at which we have been replacing our infrastructure.
Okay,
so
Councillor Fernandez will have to come back because we're actually a minute over.
Okay.
So, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Mr. Tiagi, just to kind of follow up on an early question, I think Councillor Fernandez was talking about, of course, the infrastructure as to the age after deterioration, but also having a contributing factor as to the type of materials that were used predated to what's being used now. So the numbers that you outline as to when the replacement will require, based on what we're installing in the ground currently, are we going by the same kind of context as to the same deterioration age, or is the anticipation with improvement of technologies and the different materials that there'll be a longer extension of a lifetime of the the infrastructure piping that's being put into the ground now?
Well, I'm not convinced that the type of material is a major factor. I think a major factor is even ductile iron pipes. There are municipalities who have had very good record with ductile iron pipes, for example. I think the difference may be the soil conditions, but I think the major difference, my sense, is lack of quality control during construction. And I just said, part of my presentation, that one of the things we are going to focus on is we really need to augment our inspection forces, not only for the underground stuff, but also for all parts of construction that we do.
So where have we been lacking in that? Because through your presentation you said when we're dealing with our water main break, sometimes there's a reprioritization of our workforce where more could be focused on prevention and monitoring and inspection. The focus is sometimes on reaction of these water main breaks, but typically that happens in the winter time, and a lot of the infrastructure gets put in place or reconstructed during non-winter months. So why have you been missing that parameter of more stringent quality controls?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is from Kitchener, other one from other municipality. In one of the water main breaks, we found out when the pipe was taken out, there were clear markings, the chain marking on the pipe, which means the outside protective coating has been damaged. Now, if we had inspector on the site, that pipe should have never gone underground. That should have been replaced with a different type of pipe. So it's a construction technique. Rather than using chain, they should have been using ropes or some other method which is softer on the pipe. So that's just one example. The second example, again from another municipality. So you have a cement line pipe, crane is lifting it, and by accident, water means, or by design, it drops and lands upon a piece of concrete or a stone. So lining could crack in that case. If you don't have inspector on the site, guess what? That pipe is going underground.
And I get that.
And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
No, and I agree, and I think that's where the focus needs to be on the preventative aspect of it and more monitoring. So the numbers that you outlined of staff recommendation, I see it, and please correct me, of a more of a straight line approach of we're doing 5 kilometers a year, we should be doing 10, 15 kilometers a year, as opposed to where can the increases through the utilities, through the rates be, where it can incorporate more stringent quality controls, inspection, and more preventative measures so that we can prolong the lifeline of that infrastructure already put in place. Have you looked at that aspect too, or is that incorporated into the recommended increases to the utility rates?
That is already incorporated. I think the thing to keep in mind is we're still talking about, and I think in one of the graphs we said 245 million, I think, is the backlog of the pipes that should have been replaced between 2004 and 2015. And so that alone is a challenge. Forget about what we're installing today. Forget about what happened we are supposed to do from this point on. Just in the last 10 years alone, we have accumulated a deficit. I think it's about 51 kilometers of pipe that we said we're going to install between 2004 and 2015, and that we didn't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up is Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I just want to go back to slide number 20 with the water utility cost components. And you talked a little bit about that dip there with the deficit, like the reserve deficit. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on what happened there and why, and explain that a little further. So the reserve dropped significantly in 2014.
Through the mayor, what occurred was that the revenues that we were obtaining from our customers did not cover the cost of our maintenance and the water main breaks that we were incurring. So what was happening is that maintenance, our operating and maintenance expenses were increasing. However, we didn't have the revenue to cover those costs. In order to cover those costs, we had to dip into our reserve fund in order to ensure that the operation and maintenance of our system was being maintained properly at the adequate level.
And then that would be linked to, or a result of, some of the lower rates, including covering some of the region costs in those years. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Then I just want to ask a couple of questions about moving forward with regards to the rate. So on page 38, you talked about how the difference between the 4% and the 13% would be $1.13 per month. What does that rate look like on a go-forward basis? Because this covers off 2016. I don't want to get too far into the future, but I know you talked about a 5-year timeline. So what do the rates look like beyond 2016 to continue with the program as recommended by staff?
I don't have the numbers, but I think we can do a quick calculation. So if you increase that rate by the percentage increase that we've been talking about, I think we can probably do quick math. Somebody could. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's a fairly simple calculation. Somebody has.
Well, I can ask another question while they're trying to figure that out, and I'm going to have to leave in a minute, anyways. When does so you're presenting this to us today? When do you need a commitment or a decision from council with regards to these rates moving, specifically the 2016 rate?
Yes. through you, Mr. Mayor, the discussion today is to really just to point out to you where we are in terms of our infrastructure and where the needs are and what we need to do. You don't really need to make a decision today. We are not expecting a decision today. I think that decision will be made at the budget time. But one thing I would like to say, though, is that hopefully at that time, Council will commit to a long-term strategy and not have to deal with this thing year after year. So basically, do what a number of other municipalities have done, where Council has agreed to a long-term increase for 8 or 10 years. And now I do know that obviously subsequent councils after your term, they can always overturn that decision if they want to, because they can't make financial commitment on their behalf. But I think once you set the policy direction, then the future council will then have to take a hard look as to whether or not they want to abide by that or change it.
And just one last question, maybe not exactly related to this, but not necessarily in your presentation. Every time we have a tender that comes in through the Accelerated Infrastructure Program with the triple funding, that the money always gets returned, right? It doesn't get filtered to other projects that don't fit under the Accelerated Infrastructure Program.
My understanding is the money stays in the program, and so if there is a shortfall in one project, it will be covered by the surplus from other projects.
Right, but if there's surpluses, it can stay and help the next project, or if there's deficits, it can help
Yes.
a project that needs a lift. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Yanetsky. Hang on 1 second. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Councillor Yanetsky. There we go.
Okay, there you go. Thank you for your presentation, staff, and the detailed analysis and the dire straits that we seem to be heading towards. A couple of questions and maybe clarifications. I do have to agree with Councillor Fernandez in terms of the Walkerton situation. From all my readings, it was the two brothers who really were negligent in terms of doing their duties. And of course, there's other factors as well, but that's what triggered the whole thing, and you both acknowledged on that. In your page 3 pie chart, we talk about $4.5 billion of assets that we have totally in terms of the municipality. But basically, you focused on 3 factors here: the water, sanitary, sewer, and storm, in terms of your presentations as being the critical issues we have to deal with. So when I look at the calculations of those assets and tabulating, that works out to $2.4 billion approximately. But when I take an example of the water utility, and you talk about 893 kilometers of water main, if we go to slide 16, that's fine. It's clear. And then you break it down into the factors of up to 25 years, 50 years, 75 years, etc. And the critical one that we're dealing with today is those that are 50 and over that need to be addressed and replaced quickly. Is that correct?
That is correct. But again, I'll remind you that at today's rate, the replacement cycle is over 170 years. And that is an important factor to keep in mind. And since we are not replacing the rate at which we are supposed to replace the water mains, the cycle will only increase, not decrease.
As we move on.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So based on your pie chart here, that should be looking at those issues that are 50 years and over in terms of the age of the infrastructure. That works out to 23.7%. Let's say 24% for round figures. So which is really a quarter of all your water mains need to be addressed as quickly as possible over the next 30 years. So they will be replaced. Is that more or less correct?
Hans?
And that would apply same to the sanitary sewer because they're sort of hand in hand.
Through Mr. Mayor, the AIRP program had anticipated replacing about, 30% of the infrastructure by the time it's done in 2032. So your numbers are more or less correct.
30%, okay, because those in the 50 are now increasing a little more.
That's correct. We're going out to 2032, so 2032, would have been about 1950.
Okay, and I'm not going to quibble on that because I know exactly where you're coming from. Okay, that's fine. you're recommending an increase of 13% as option 2, as the preferred one that staff wants, and I can understand that. And if we look at that increase, we also looked at the chart that you had that showed how much the city of Kitchener had increased, and it didn't get the page, or even 25, which happens to deal with sanitary sewer. So much water, so much increase was done by the region and only so much by the city. And we were always short every year along that factor until 2015. If we are looking at an increase of, as you stated on page 37, 10.8%, 7.6% for the water and 9.2% for storm, are we expecting a 5% increase at the regional level to more or less continue? Or is the region doing some type of study like this, and they're going to come back to their council and say, their staff and say, well, I think we should be looking at 10 to 15% maybe an increase. Is that happening there? I don't know, maybe the mayor may comment on that, or are we just going to be assume that the region's 4 to 5% will continue on for the next 30 years?
Hans?
Through the mayor, I just have the sanitary and the water and the stormwater and the water utility budgets here that were finalized last year. And I'm just going to read off the line that says percent in the region wholesale rate. The 2015 rate for regional increase was 7.9%. 2016 is shown as 6.9%. 2017 is shown as 6.9%. 2018 at 6.9%. And 2019 at 5.9%. So that's the 5-year duration for that one. The water was 4.9 in 15, 4.9 in 16, 3.9 in 17, 2.9 in 18, and 2.9 in 19. So those are the rates that we have used currently in the calculations to date.
Okay, and I appreciate that. So it's not that they're holding their own with a little more than what we were looking at initially.
Councillor Yanetsky, we're out of time, so already we can actually give you some extra as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Thank you. First, I would just want to say thank you for this very engaging presentation. Over an hour went by like that, and it's all very interesting. I have a lot of questions. So first off, I want to just mention that I agree with Councillor Ioannidis that other levels of government really need to step up to the plate. We cannot expect from our residents to increase these utility rates so high so quickly. That's not a question, that's a comment. Thank you for reminding me. So, but I will look to other conversations about that. Secondly, I want to ask, do you notice that the rates are increasing during high construction periods, like during the LRT construction, because of the issues of supply and demand?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at the present time, yes, the prices have gone up. I think you've recognized that in some of the last tenders that have come along. If you remember at the beginning of the year, some of the tenders were on the lower side, and that's because they were tendered early on in the year before construction really ramped up. Now we have higher prices because it has ramped up. So the answer is yes.
Okay, so could it be fair to say that in a couple years, if construction rate, if the level of construction decreases, that perhaps the costs will decrease?
Let me answer that question. I think if you look at graph 36, you will see that construction costs were high not only in last few years, but going back to 2004, 5, 6, they have always been higher than what we projected. So the deficit we are talking about of over 252 million is not based upon just last 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
It has been a continuous struggle
Okay,
since the program
fair.
had started.
That's fair, but I mean, in other fields, technology is changing at such a rapid pace, and from the presentation, what I could glean is that that's the case in this industry as well. Is that true? I'm just trying to ask you to confirm, is that true? That technology, that the way that we can do trenchless, less intrusive fixes, is technology potentially changing so rapidly now?
Through the Mayor, to answer the question about changing technology, the answer is yes, there is always new technology coming out. We're always looking at new technology. One of those, like I said, is the relining of sanitary sewers, which we do take on to try to extend the life. In some areas we're successful, in some we're not. It really depends on certain conditions. The other thing that I wanted to say is that the AIRP program, the replacement program, a big part of that program is replacing the road. In the per meter cost, the $5,000 per meter, or $5 million per kilometer, that cost includes the road. The road makes up almost 40% of the cost of that work, and the road itself is controlled by oil. So that part will be controlled a lot by oil prices. The other parts, not so much. So you'll see fluctuations on parts of it due to oil, some due to construction, and simply others due to the economy. And if you look at the graph on the page that shows this past 10, 12 years, you'll see there has been a roller coaster of prices. 2009 was a dip in the economy, and prices went down. So there are external price influences that affect the per unit rate. Mm-hmm. Will that happen in the future? We don't know.
We don't know.
The best we've done is we've assumed a 2% increase from the present day.
Okay, thank you. Do I have time for another question? I'm concerned that we have a slight. I'm just a little concerned about something that I saw on slide 19 about the current reality of water mains, because so far with other councillors, there's been talk about, we have to replace 50-year-old plus pipes first, which makes common sense, but it looks like there also appears to be a problem with water mains in the range of 25 to 49 years old. So are we looking at data of the water main breaks in recent years and noticing that a lot are failing much earlier, or what's the deal with that?
Go.
Through the Mayor, during that time period that you noted, yes, we're seeing an acceleration of failure of those pipes within that time period. What we've noticed is that part of the issue seems to be the installation of those pipes at the time period. We have noticed chain markings on these pipes in locations where the breaks have occurred.
Right.
So there is an issue that I think with inspection, quality control, I think when you look at the time period and the growth of the city during that time period, if you look at the LRT construction and how fast things are moving, how timelines are really constrained, I believe that occurred back then as well. If you can imagine, you got hundreds of thousands, you got thousands of people moving to this area, subdivisions and developers are crying for services. I'm sure if you were the council of that day, the council was probably under pressure to get these infrastructures in place in order to accommodate this growth. And I feel that with the installation, I think they were doing exactly what you're seeing with the LRT. It is very fast and it's happening rapidly. And when you have a rapid installation, corners are cut, things are put into the ground that should not be put in the ground. And I think we're seeing the result of that today.
Well, let's certainly hope that's not going to be repeated with the LRT construction this year. Thank you.
Councillor Gazzola.
Yeah, my first question is, why did we just receive this report 2 minutes before today's meeting?
Well, I think, Councillor Gazzola, part of the answer to your question is these are strat sessions, and so the idea is for staff to present information, and we're not being asked to make any decisions, and then to engage in dialogue with us. That's the way these sessions are normally run. They're not committee meetings.
I know, but to try to, this is a very complex discussion. Did we really expect to have some concrete questions out of it? I have a few minor questions. I really haven't, I need to read this about 4 more times to fully understand it. But my first question is, how much are we putting into the ARP every year now? Let's just take 2015. You may have answered that somewhere, but if you can just humor me and tell me, how much are we putting in 2015?
Through the mayor, approximately $22 million.
$22 million. Okay, and from what I understand, we at this period we should have done 79 kilometers, and we've only done 18 kilometers of work.
Through the mayor, we should have done about 100, and we've only done about 51.
Okay. So we're putting in 22 million to satisfy your concepts. What should be going in what should have gone in this year?
I'm sorry, please repeat.
We've put in 22 million into the ARP for this year in order to satisfy where you would feel confident that we have sufficient sustainable funding. What should have gone in?
In order to meet the program target for per year construction, we should be at approximately 46 million.
So we put in 24 million less than we should have this year.
At this point in time.
Yeah. Okay. And if things would be going forward, we would do the same thing next year.
If things are going forward, you would add to that by whatever the cost of construction is.
Okay. Quick question, and I think it's been sort of veered too, but your estimations going out all along here are based on current technology. Is that correct? There's no new technology that's being considered.
That is correct. It's based on replacement only.
Okay, can someone tell me what kind of funding are we getting from the gas tax revenue fund, and is that coming into here?
There is no gas tax that funds the AIRP program.
So
there's only 3 sources of funding.
So it comes strictly from the
water, sanitary,
and there's no gas tax, all this gas tax money that we've been receiving, which, by the way, how much would we have received this year?
Through the mayor, the gas tax funds the roads program to the tune of approximately $4 million. It also funds bridges and other areas, and I believe Mr. Chapman may have some additional information on that.
I know I can answer it. The overall number that we get is just over 6 million, as I recall.
6 million a year?
6 million a year as the city. Mr. Chapman, can you seem to remember that from previous oops, sorry, I thought I clicked you. There you go.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, there was a similar line of questioning through budget, and I know that we had a summary of all of the projects funded, so I'll send that out again after this meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can the tax levy assist with this problem? Does all the required funding have to come from the 3 utilities, or can the tax levy assist? So it's a theoretical question.
Mr. Chapman?
I suppose money could go from the levy towards this program. I would argue that money could not go from the utility rates in the other direction.
Well, they're not so they could come the other way.
Conceivably, yes.
Yeah. Now, just one final question. in view of all of this, what does it really mean? Are the three utilities in a deficit position at this point?
Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're just about to prepare the August financial reports. What I can recall is that they essentially had all liquidated their stabilization balances, so they were all pretty much around a break-even position. Again, you'll have more current information within a month.
But at this point, in spite of all our sins of the past, they're still not in a deficit position, and they're not on the verge of bankruptcy.
Okay, if you can answer, and then we need to move on, because...
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I think I need to state something here. It may not be in the deficit position from the reserves point of view, but it's in a serious deficit position from the state of the infrastructure and the reliability and safety.
No,
Okay,
I'm not questioning that.
Okay, if you can just wrap up, because I've already given you over a minute extra.
Well, see, there you go. You see, these times I've lost my train of thought. No, okay, the point is, we're not in a deficit position at this point. We're in a theoretical or real, we have a real problem in front of us, but at this point, are we in a deficit position with those three utilities?
Okay.
And I think the answer...
Okay.
The answer was no. Can I
Councillor Gazzola, I'll gladly come back to you. It's over 7 minutes for you already, so I need to be fair to the others. Councillor Davey.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up on that point off the bat. So I just want to make sure I understand this deficit question. So the utilities itself may not be in deficit, but the deficit is what's in the ground. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct,
okay.
Yes.
And to highlight that fact, then, if we wanted to get us in a surplus position, all we have to do is make sure we don't repair anything for the next 5 years, and we'll build up all kinds of reserves, and we still won't be in a deficit. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. Has much material... We had a presentation on this, this exact issue during budget time, and it seems like the situation, even though that presentation was pretty, I would say, dire as well, it seems like this is a bit worse. Is there been any significant new information that has come since when we dealt with this issue at budget?
There really no new information, the hard data, but perhaps new thinking.
Okay. I want to touch upon this, the idea of technology too, and I'm as optimistic as anyone, I think, when it comes to technology, but if I can get staff's perspective on looking into a crystal ball in the future, this seems like a very complicated, under-the-ground, replacing pipe type of system. Is there any expectation in the next 10 or 15 years we're going to see any technology that even has a chance of dramatically reducing costs?
I think there are opportunities where costs could be reduced. But I don't see a technology where in the next 10 or 15 or 20 or even 50 years, the trend I've seen over the last number of years projecting into the future, where the costs will become so small that we can rely upon that alone. I think trenchless technology does have its limitations, and we can do certain things with that technology, but in many cases when you're looking at old pipes, really the only thing to do is to open up the road and put the new pipes in.
Okay. When I look back at the chart, the graphs that you have here, when the AIRP program was put in place, if I could just understand it a little bit, because from my vantage, it looks like it was doomed out of the gate, largely because they estimated the cost to be $15 million to reach the 8.6 kilometers, but that cost went up 100% for the next 2 years at least. Do we have any idea what the huge miss was there?
Maybe Hans could answer. I don't really know why, but you're absolutely right. It was on the wrong track from day one.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it started off at approximately $1,800 per meter replacement. I don't really have a good explanation other than that was an increase in the economy. Things were good. Investments were going up. Prices were going up. As you can see, there are two dips, 7 and 9, and they relate to the global economy and to the economy here specifically. So what really caused that? To be honest with you, it may have been an underestimation of the program at the start. I won't count that out. That certainly could be a factor. Between that and economic realities, I believe that's probably the best explanation I can offer.
Okay. In the suggestions for the options going forward, I just want to make sure. So there's a 9% figure minimum and a recommended 13% figure. Those figures relate directly to the 9.9% that we just increased the last budget, correct? So on page 37, there's the recommended 13% increase, and there's the minimum recommended 9% increase, and the numbers are underneath. I just want to make sure I'm comparing apples to apples. That would be the same number as the 9.9% increase for the 2015 budget?
The 9% and 13% increase, they are strictly for the AIRP program, and they translate into the percentage increase you have on page 37 for each of the three utilities.
Okay. There was an earlier question about adequate funding for today, because $20 million went in, and Mr. Gross said around 40-something. But when I look on the chart, too, it has the deficit covered as well, and that approaches the $60 million figure. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. In order to cover the backlog and to be good going forward, the number that should have went in to the ARP program this year should have been $60 million. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Oh. Okay, that covers my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're now going into the second rounds of questions. Councillor Fernandez.
Okay, so I just want to establish a little bit of background for a minute. How long have we been collecting these condition scores? Like these, how long have we been collecting this data? And how do we rate the scores? Is it 1 to 10, 1 to 100? What is it?
Mr. Gross?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the condition data on pipes was started in earnest probably in about 1999-2000. Greg McTaggart can provide you, and I will provide you with a very extensive explanation of what is collected and how it's collected. I don't want to go into that today, but I can tell you that every year we're collecting more and more information on the sanitary, on the water through breaks, and just recently we started collecting information on the stormwater system. That's when the stormwater utility started.
Right.
And
so
that's when we...
I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to try and get as many questions as I can. So what is our rating scale? Like, is it 1 to 10, 1 to 100? And what does that mean? Like, is 1 very, very bad? Is 100 very, very good? And how do we, does a professional engineer look at those statistics and those scores?
Okay, it's a complex answer, and I'm not going to get into it other than to say that each pipe, storm sanitary water, is rated on its own. That's put into a formula together with the road, and there's a complex model that's used in order to prioritize the roads that need to come first, taking into account all of those factors.
Okay, all right. Okay, I appreciate that. That helps me understand a little bit more. Councillor Davey was talking about the IRP ARIP, sorry, and that it was doomed from the gate. How many municipalities do we know have this kind of a program?
Perhaps I could answer that question. I think most municipalities do have programs similar to this. They may have different names of doing it, but the fact is that when you're doing complete reconstruction of a road, you have to take into account the condition of not only one, but all the four utilities, if you may, including road.
Okay.
So they have a different way of doing it, but in essence, similar programs, yes.
Mr. Tagey, you mentioned the gentleman to your right is Mr. Winters, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and your position at the city is, because you haven't answered any questions, so I'm just kind of wondering what your part you played in this.
I assisted in facilitating the presentation and pulling the information together. My role is to help support the asset management program as well as supporting services within INS.
Oh, okay, all right. And you're a professional engineer as well?
I'm not a professional engineer.
Okay, all right. I wasn't sure because I understand what the other gentlemen do. Thank you. Sorry for putting that in right there. The other, Mr. Tagey, one of the questions, the discussion points we had was related to our stormwater management ponds, and you know this is something that as a city we've been a little bit more forward thinking in setting out doing. In our discussion, I had mentioned to you that sometimes we may be able to put some of the funding that we use to fix, to clean up our stormwater management ponds, take some of that funding and transfer it into our utilities. And I think I heard Mr. Chapman talk about that we could use the tax base for utilities and repairs, but not the other way around, right? Okay. Can we draw some of the money from our stormwater management fees and put that into this program to help move it along a little bit quicker?
I think in theory we can, but I think as Mr. Gross pointed out that we have, I think, 125 stormwater ponds in the system. And for them to work properly, they need regular maintenance as well. But I do agree with you that water main breaks are more serious than stormwater ponds, so there's no argument there.
Yeah, and I think that's something that maybe we should be looking at sort of a balance in terms of not just increasing the rates. And I think Councillor Marsh was indicating that she felt that we need to be looking at different levels of government for some of that funding too.
Okay, Councillor Fernandez, we're into overtime. Do you still have a lot? Because I don't want to come back a third time. One more question.
Okay, I'll let you go ahead. Unless something burns in my head.
We'll go for one.
$5 million is the actual concerning infrastructure. What would the real cost be to replace these over the coming years? So when in the numbers, and this is not including the 40% of the aging water mains that are between 25 and 49 years old. If we were only to address that piece of the pie on page 19, which I'm figuring is about $500 million, are the numbers that you've given us today the best numbers that we can expect to address that as quickly as possible? Or are the numbers that you've given us today something that we need to be looking at over a 5 to 10 year to address more of that pie on page 19?
I think the difficulty here may be because when you start looking at each utility on its own, it may present a different picture than if you start to put them all together. Because the AIRP program is designed based upon the condition of all the utility, whole infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily go into effect if, for example, only one of the four need replacement. Then the funding for that has to come from different source than AIRP program. So when we talk about water main replacement, for example, part of the replacement funding comes from AIRP, but also we need additional funding on its own just to replace water mains where the needs are. I think Mr. Malcolm showed you one of the slides where if you look at the dots where the water main breaks happened, if you add up the cost of repair of those water mains, and I haven't done the calculation, but to seem to me that we probably would have paid for that water main replacement 15 years ago, rather than spending money on patchwork that we did on that particular water main. So those are the real challenges we have, because we don't have enough money in the pot to replace the water mains on a timely basis.
Okay,
great.
Thank you.
Councillor Yanetsky.
Thank you once again. On the your last page of your presentation, page 39, right at the bottom, staff resources will need to be increased to maintain the maintenance and the replacement programs. About how many resource staff are you looking that you will need?
We don't have the answer for that, for the simple reason it will depend upon council's decision. So depending upon the scope of the program, if you look at the chart on page 36, it points out different points as to where the deficit is. And you can pick up a number from there, or you can pick up the number from the recommendation we have made, and based upon what council decides, we can then come back, and we will come back saying, okay, if the construction program, maintenance program increases by a certain amount, then what will be the implication in terms of staffing resources?
So will then that funding be from utility rates costs, or will it come from the tax base?
No, that will also come from utility rates.
Okay.
And by the way, when we come back with the program, with the actual report on the budget, that will account for not only the actual dollars required for construction and maintenance, but also staffing cost.
So you're giving us three options here as we look at it. Use the current ARP increase, or option 1 or option 2. And I know here we are in August. We'll be considering the budget come November. And I'm wondering what your recommendation will be for as councillors for budget time in terms of when you present the budget to us as to what you're going to be looking forward to. Option 2 most likely?
Option 2 is the recommended one. In fact, we put option 1, 9% line, only as an exercise because we wanted to see what the impact will be and what the difference will be between 9% and 13%. But in fact, our recommendation is and will remain that the 13% for next 10 years. On AIRP, not 13%, just to clarify, 13% is not the utility rate increase. 13% is the increase in the funding for AIRP, and that translates into the numbers that you see on page 37, which is 8.8% for sanitary, 5.6 for water, 7.2 for storm, and then when we add maintenance money, then you see the numbers at the bottom of the page.
Another 2%.
Yes.
Right. Okay, so we're at a point that we have to make a very tough decision come budget time.
And frankly, if you're asking my opinion, it's not tough. I think the writing is on the wall. We have to choose between having a reliable, safe system, and when you look at the table on page 38, and when we start looking at water rate of $43 a month.
Which page did you say?
38.
38?
So even with the increase we are recommending, if you look at $43 a month for the vital water that you need for survival, that is still less than watching TV, the cable rates. So the question we need to ask is, and that's why I'm saying, in my view, it's not a tough decision. The question we need to ask is, as a community, what is more important, watching TV or having a safe, reliable water system?
Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Thank you. I agree with your last comment. Security of our water systems is very important, but it's not as sometimes simplistic as you outlined it. Our households do have to look at the overall costs, and we have to be mindful of it. That's not to say that, of course, we need to do our part to improve and safeguard our infrastructure. So my question is, and I appreciate what staff has done. This is preemptive in showing exactly the direction that we're heading and what we need to do. And I think when this information comes early, it's better than it being dumped on us during the budget process. So I think Mr. Gross had mentioned that a big component of a infrastructure replacement is the road restructuring cost as well. I heard around 40% of that cost. So if we're looking at increasing funding or additional infusion of funds to the AIRP program, that means we'll be doing longer stretches of roadways for reconstruction and replacement of infrastructure. So are we anticipating an additional load to the tax base as well, because a certain component of a road restructure is a capital out of current funding as well? So would automatically additional increase if we're doing more longer stretches of roadways, that we will have to anticipate certain increases towards the tax base as well?
Maybe I could just answer
Sure,
the question.
either.
Under AIRP program and what we are recommending, it will have no bearing on the tax rate, because the road part of the construction also will take place. Because once you dig up the road to install water main, storm sewer, sanitary sewer, then really you have to reconstruct that road, because all the old asphalt will be gone. So logically it makes sense that when you're doing the work on 3 utilities, the 3 utilities should pay for the road as well.
Okay, so there's no additional burden onto the capital occurring.
Yes.
Okay, I want to confirm that, and I think that's helpful for us to understand that the basis of the funding is coming entirely from the user rates. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gazzola.
Couple of quick questions. Can you tell me what you were expecting to get out of our meeting today?
I'm sorry, Council, could you repeat the question, please?
What did you expect to get from Council as a result of your information today? Is this just a presentation, end of the story?
No, my thoughts on that one twofold. One is what we expected was, first part, to inform Council as to how we see the situation in terms of the critical infrastructure that we have. But the second part was also, I'm hoping at the end of the discussion today, Council will give some indication as to where Council's thoughts are in terms of the increase, because for us to prepare information for the budget, we need to have some indication as to where Council's thoughts are.
Yeah, but that
not necessarily the final decision, but I think we need to have some indication as to where Council is.
Okay, that's not a decision for today. The other, I was trying to follow up on it. You may have answered it, but is there somewhere also a report similar to this dealing with roads and bridges?
As we showed you on page 3 and 4 of the presentation, we own a huge amount of infrastructure. Today's presentation is strictly on the 3 programs, but in future we'll be coming back with the reports on other parts of the infrastructure as well.
So there is another chapter to this dealing with roads and bridges.
Yes.
Looking at
facilities and other infrastructure.
Looking at the same problem with similar problems.
The only major difference will be that whereas these operate as utilities, when it comes to roads and other facilities, they are tax supported, and they will be looked through different lens. But yes, they are being looked at.
They'll be looked by the same taxpayer. The final question, I just want to clarify, make sure I fully understand this. On page 37, if we go according to your recommendation, and it not only includes ARP, but it also has to include maintenance, we're looking at the figures at the bottom of page 37. And that also includes any new staff. Is that right?
That is total, including everything, yes.
That includes everything, including any new staff?
Yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Galloway Seelock.
Yeah, I just had one question that arose from some discussion that's happened, and I'd like Hans to answer this question. And it was with regards to using some of the stormwater management money at the to cover off more of the roads and water main breaks. So Hans, do some of our stormwater systems not include or impact our streams, ponds, fish habitat, other habitat, and prevent erosion of our water systems?
Mr. Gross.
Through the Mayor, those all need to be covered through the stormwater utility. What I'd like to say simply in response is that there is a stormwater management master plan that's coming forward. There will be an update given to you later this year. It will be finalized early next year. Out of that will be recommendations for projects. The projects are being done through a Class EA process. My comment at this point is I would strongly suggest that you not look to the stormwater utility for funding, for additional funding toward AIRP.
Thanks for that response. I just think it's important to have a holistic view of everything that's covered under stormwater management, because it's not just the simple ponds that we see sometimes. It's a very intricate system that we work with.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Galloway Seelock. I don't see any others, so I will go into my questions. And so just as a follow-up to Councillor Yanetsky's question, if I may, so to be clear, when you're talking about the additional dollars that you're talking about investing in infrastructure, those dollars reflect the staffing that would be required, the consultants that would be required, the actual work that would actually get done. All of that is included in that new number, correct?
Yes, Your Worship, yes.
Okay, thank you. I think it was you, Mr. Tyagi, that referenced that this was sort of all a result of chronic underfunding, skyrocketing replacement costs and age. This, well, it's certainly an issue that we're dealing with. I know it was referenced earlier, you've been at a number of different municipalities, and I know others have as well. This isn't unique to Kitchener. Is that fair to say? I mean, well, we may have some uniquenesses around age based on how the community developed and so on. The chronic underfunding and skyrocketing replacement costs are issues that that others are dealing with as well.
Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. I think those two factors are not unique to Kitchener. I think what is unique to Kitchener is number one, which is the response Kitchener had in terms of in the past in funding the replacement and maintenance. So basically, the way I see it is that number 2 and number 3 were pointing us to go north, and we decided to go south. So they were pointing us that we should increase the funding substantially in the last year, from year 2006 data, if you look at that. And what the decision was made was not increase, but really, as I said, instead of going north, we went south. And that's why we have the problem that we do.
Sure, and I appreciate that. But I guess, speaking with my counterparts across the country who are also dealing with huge infrastructure deficits, I guess I would maybe, say that many perhaps went south instead of north, or at the very least stayed at the equator and didn't do either. So I would just maybe make that point. When we're talking about replacement, the new infrastructure that we're looking to replace the existing, are we in some instances contemplating increasing capacities? I know in the past, for example, with our storm sewers, I think we used to build to like the 2-year storm. Now I think we're moving towards the 5 and the 10-year storm as a way of dealing with climate change mitigation. Is that something that's being contemplated in the scenarios you've outlined?
Yes, definitely, but Hans could provide more detailed answer.
Okay, Mr. Gross.
Through the mayor, anytime we do a replacement of infrastructure, we always look at the current land uses as well as the future land uses from an infill, from a change in use point of view. And the infrastructure is designed accordingly. In terms of the storm sewers, the current is a 5-year return storm. That is still ongoing at the present time. What we are doing, though, is ensuring that overland flow routes are identified. And that's the issue in the older sections of town, is that we don't have them. And that's one of the key things that we want to address as part of the Stormwater Management Master Plan is where should they be? Do we need to buy land in order to provide for that to happen?
Okay, thank you. And my last question, obviously the desire to see additional dollars from federal and provincial governments is something that municipalities are pushing for. I mean, it came up at AMO last week. It certainly come out as a priority of FCM in the federal election, and over the coming weeks we'll be speaking to it. I mean, the number that the Big City Mayors Caucus has referenced has been an additional infrastructure ask of $1.5 billion across the country for core infrastructure. So none of that, I presume, has been factored in to here. So if those dollars became available, that would then help mitigate some of the pressures put onto ratepayers. Is that correct?
Mr. Mayor, you are correct that any money that comes from federal, provincial governments will help. However, I will be remiss if I didn't state one more time. If you look at page 36, the graph there, starting point of 2015, if council were to accept that pink line, that 13% increase in AIRP, even with that, two things. One is we are starting with a deficit of $252 million, and that pink line will not cover an inch of that $252 million. That's where I think we could use money from federal and provincial governments. The second part is, as we follow that pink line, we will be increasing the deficit every year because our investment should be at 60 million and we are at 22. So that 252 million will keep increasing until we reach year 2024, 25. So I just want to point out that yes, it will help, but I would still not recommend that we take a softer approach than what we are recommending.
Oh no, and I'm not making that argument for that purpose. I guess I'm just trying to emphasize the need that I think municipalities have in terms of dealing with these issues, and why, quite frankly, everyone is speaking so strongly about the need for this investment, whether it's this stuff that we're talking about or the reports that you reference are going to be coming in the future. So I think that's it. Just want to thank staff for really a lot of information that's there. And Councillor Fernandez, are you looking to speak again, or do you have more questions? No. Oh. I was just going to wrap it up now because we're half an hour late. Did you have something you needed? No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Thank you. I guess one of my quick comment really is that we understand that we're heading for deficit infrastructure, and I appreciate the information we've been given. But I think what's really important, and I've heard it from a number of our councillors, and maybe the challenge is to find out how we can work with the other levels of government. The mayor has already reiterated that. Is there something that we can do, work together with you and other levels of government to see how we can subsidize the cost of infrastructure that's happening now? And I guess that's sort of more of a challenge than a question for you, just to consider and maybe come back with further information if possible.
Okay, thank you. So just as I was saying earlier then, thank you to staff for the work. I know a lot of work went into preparing this report. There was a lot of information here, and no doubt people will probably have more questions afterwards. I think part of our challenge going forward is also putting this down, and I see Victoria is here, which is great, trying to figure out how we can work to make sure we better educate our residents as well around some of these issues. Certainly the media is going to play a role in this, but I think we also need to make sure that we convey that information out to our ratepayers going forward, because it is something that us and every other municipality across Canada are going to have to deal with in the coming years, and it is a serious issue for all of us. So with that, the other item is simply to move the in-camera items, moved by Councillor Ioannidis, seconded by Councillor Davey. All those in favour? Opposed? That's carried. And do I need 3 readings or no? No. Okay. All those in... Councillor Gazzola? Yep.
I wanted to ask a question as to why those first 2 items are going to caucus. They seem like routine matters to me. That why are they going to caucus?
Sorry, why they're... Well, it's listed on the green sheets why they're there, and you can ask the question at the start of the caucus session, and we can make that determination then.
Can I ask another question then?
Yeah, go ahead.
I understand that the sheets do give a reason for things going into caucus. Why aren't those reasons included on the public page?
I don't know if anyone from clerks can answer that, or there's nobody here from legal. Mr. Chapman?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's my understanding that the first page of the green sheets is posted publicly, so the general reason for the item going to caucus is disclosed.
So what?
So the general reason that's provided on the cover page of the green sheets is public. The detailed rationale is not.
Well, those detailed rationale are usually a one-liner that gives a little bit of explanation.
Correct. So that's made public, but obviously the detailed caucus rationale is
not.
not.
I'm not asking. I'm just asking for the one-liner that says why it's going to caucus.
And that is posted publicly, I can confirm.
Is it?
Yes.
They'll confirm that.
Okay. No,
Okay.
that is fine. Good.
Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Fernandez, seconded by Councillor Yanetsky. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thank you.